The Fortress of Solitude, Nathaniel Blackwood. His $50 million home on the cliffs of Newport had earned a nickname among locals. Blackwood's Tomb, an architectural marvel of glass and steel perched above the Atlantic. It housed one of the wealthiest men in America and absolutely nothing resembling joy. At 42, Nathaniel had amassed a fortune through his cybersecurity firm, Blackguard Technologies, becoming the invisible guardian behind half the world's digital infrastructure. Business magazines called him brilliant. The few employees who'd actually met him called him exacting. No one called him happy. Mr. Blackwood, you have the Richardson proposal review at 7 tomorrow. His assistant's voice floated through the house's sound system, the only human voice the space had heard in days. Acknowledged, Nathaniel replied, staring at the rain hammering against the panoramic windows. 5 years had passed since Olivia's death, since the sailboat accident that claimed his fiancée and any belief that happiness was sustainable. Now his life operated with mechanical precision. Meetings, acquisitions, work, sleep. No variables. No surprises. Lightning split the sky as Nathaniel climbed into his charcoal Bentley for the drive back from his company's labs. He rarely drove himself, preferring solitude to chauffeurs, finding peace in the precise control of the machine beneath him. Tonight, however, the universe had other plans. The car stuttered on a narrow coastal road 20 minutes from home, dashboard lights flickering before going dark. Nathaniel's jaw tightened as the engine died, leaving him stranded in the downpour. Perfect. He called his mechanic and learned it would be nearly 2 hours before assistance arrived. Looking up through the torrential rain, he noticed lights from a building set back from the road, modest but welcoming. With reluctance, he stepped out into the storm. The sign reading Sunflower Children's Home swung wildly in the wind as Nathaniel approached. He'd never noticed this place before, though he'd driven this road hundreds of times. Just as he reached the porch, the door swung open. "Good heavens, you're soaked through." A woman with auburn hair pulled into a messy bun stood in the doorway. "Come in before you catch your death." Nathaniel hesitated, uncomfortable with both the invitation and the concern in the stranger's eyes. "My car broke down. I just need to use your phone. Our landline's out from the storm, but you're welcome to wait inside." She stepped aside, revealing a cozy, if worn, entryway. "I'm Josephine Winters, director here." Nathaniel entered reluctantly, immediately struck by the contrast to his own home. Where his residence was minimalist and cold, this place overflowed with evidence of life, children's artwork covering walls, mismatched furniture bearing the scuffs of use, and the faint scent of something baking. "Thank you. I'm Nathaniel Blackwood," she finished for him, a flicker of recognition in her green eyes. "The tech billionaire. I've read about your foundation's work." Before he could respond, a crash echoed from another room, followed by a child's giggle. "Marco, what did you knock over now?" Josephine called, though her voice carried more affection than annoyance. A boy of about 7 appeared in the doorway, dark curls falling over curious brown eyes. His right arm ended just below the elbow, but he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never known any other reality. "Miss Joe!" The pillow fort collapsed and took the lamp with it. "Nobody's hurt except the lamp. It's very dead." The boy noticed Nathaniel and tilted his head. "Who's the fancy man?" Josephine smothered a smile. "This is Mr. Blackwood. His car broke down in the storm. Mr. Blackwood, this is Marco, our resident architectural engineer." "Pillow forts are serious business," Marco said solemnly, extending his left hand to Nathaniel. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Blackwood." Nathaniel stared at the small hand before awkwardly shaking it. When was the last time he'd touched another human being? Handshakes with business associates didn't count. Those were transactions, not connections. "Marco, would you mind showing our guest to the sitting room while I check on dinner?" Josephine asked. Before Nathaniel could protest, Marco had grabbed his sleeve, tugging him deeper into the house. "You picked a good night to visit. It's spaghetti night, and Miss Joe makes the best sauce in the universe." As they entered a modest living area, Nathaniel found himself surrounded by a half-dozen children of various ages, all regarding him with undisguised curiosity. A girl with glasses was reading to younger children. 2 boys played chess in the corner. The normalcy of it all felt alien to him. "Are you a spy?" Marco asked suddenly. "You look like a spy." For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt the corner of his mouth twitch involuntarily. "No, just a businessman." "That's exactly what a spy would say," Marco whispered conspiratorially, and something in Nathaniel's carefully constructed world shifted, ever so slightly, like the first crack in a dam. Paper planes and promises. "You fold it like this, then like that? No, not too hard or it'll tear." Nathaniel's fingers, more accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts than crafting toys, awkwardly demonstrated the paper airplane technique. Marco watched with intense concentration, his one hand carefully mimicking the movements. 3 weeks had passed since the rainstorm that stranded Nathaniel at Sunflower Children's Home. His car had been fixed the very next morning, yet somehow he found himself returning. First with donations, new books, a desperately needed washing machine, educational tablets. Then with his time, which surprised everyone, himself most of all. "There," Nathaniel said as Marco completed his airplane. "Now you try launching it." Marco's face lit up as the paper creation soared across the yard, gliding with unexpected grace before landing at Josephine's feet as she emerged from the kitchen garden with a basket of vegetables. "I see the aviation department is hard at work," she smiled, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. Dirt smudged her cheek, and Nathaniel found himself fighting an inexplicable urge to brush it away. "Mr. Nate taught me about aerodynamics," Marco announced proudly. "Aerodynamics," Nathaniel corrected gently. The nickname still felt strange to his ears. In his corporate world, he was always Mr. Blackwood or Sir, never Nate, certainly never Mr. Nate, as Marco had christened him on his second visit. Josephine set down her basket. "Marco, can you take these tomatoes to Miss Harriet in the kitchen? Tell her they're for tonight's salad." When Marco dashed off, Josephine turned to Nathaniel, her expression curious. "You know, when you first showed up on our doorstep, I never expected the Nathaniel Blackwood would become our regular visitor." "Neither did I," he admitted, watching Marco race toward the old Victorian house that served as both orphanage and home to 12 children, ranging from 4 to 17. "May I ask why you keep coming back?" Her question was gentle but direct. Nathaniel considered deflecting with mentions of tax benefits or corporate social responsibility, the answers he'd give to business associates. Instead, truth surfaced unexpectedly. "It's quiet in my house." "Too quiet?" Something in Josephine's eyes softened. "Well, quiet is one thing we're perpetually short of around here." The dinner bell rang, interrupting their conversation. Children emerged from various corners of the property. Esmeralda from the reading nook beneath the oak tree, the twins, Mateo and Federico, from the basketball hoop, Sophia from her garden project, and little Penny, who at 4 was the youngest resident, from her perpetual game of make-believe with imaginary friends. "Will you stay for dinner?" Josephine asked. "It's just vegetable stew, nothing fancy." "I have a conference call with Tokyo at 7, he replied automatically, then hesitated. "But perhaps I could stay for a while." Inside, the dining room buzzed with activity. 12 children, Josephine, and 3 other staff members, Ms. Harriet the cook, Mr. Thomas the groundskeeper, and Delia the social worker who visited 3 times weekly, created a chaos that would have once sent Nathaniel fleeing. Now, strangely, he found himself drawn to it. "Mr. Nate, sit by me." Marco patted the empty chair beside him. "I saved you a spot." Dinner at Sunflower was nothing like the silent, solitary meals Nathaniel ate at his glass dining table overlooking the ocean. Here, conversations overlapped, debates erupted over whether peas were actually edible, the consensus was firmly negative, and jokes flew across the table with the same enthusiasm as Marco's paper airplanes. "Miss Jo says you make computers safe," 16-year-old Trevor said between mouthfuls. "Like from hackers and stuff?" "Something like that," Nathaniel replied, surprised by the boy's interest. "My company creates security systems to protect information. Could you show me sometime?" Trevor asked, eyes lighting up. "I've been teaching myself to code from library books." Before Nathaniel could respond, 13-year-old Esmeralda chimed in. "If you're showing Trevor computer stuff, you have to help me with my science project." It's about renewable energy, and you probably know all about that fancy stuff. Suddenly, Nathaniel found himself bombarded with requests, help with homework, questions about his work, pleas to judge an upcoming talent show. The children saw him not as the intimidating billionaire, but as a repository of knowledge and attention. Later, as twilight settled over the property, Nathaniel found himself on the porch swing beside Josephine, watching the children play a final game of tag before bedtime. "They've adopted you," she said simply. "Fair warning, there's no escaping now." "I should be getting back," he replied, though without his usual urgency. "Of course." Josephine nodded. "The Tokyo call." He checked his watch. "Actually, I missed it 20 minutes ago." Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something like anticipation stirring within him. Not for business deals or acquisitions, but for tomorrow, for seeing Marco's face light up with a new discovery, for hearing Esmeralda's passionate theories about sustainable energy, for sitting in this creaky swing beside a woman who looked at him and saw something more than his net worth. Miss Joe. Marco appeared in the doorway, pajama-clad and clutching a book. "Is it story time yet?" "I'll be right there, sweetheart. Can Mr. Nate read tonight?" "He does good robot voices." Josephine raised an eyebrow at Nathaniel. "You do good robot voices?" He cleared his throat. "I may have read some science fiction during my last visit. Please." Marco's eyes, wide and hopeful, contained a power that all Nathaniel's wealth couldn't match. "One story," Nathaniel conceded, rising from the swing. As he followed Marco inside, he passed the entrance hall mirror and caught a glimpse of himself. The same expensive suit, the same carefully groomed appearance, but something had changed in his face. The perpetual furrow between his brows had softened, and in his eyes there was something he hadn't seen reflected back at him since before Olivia's death. It looked suspiciously like purpose. Walls crumbling down. "You can't be serious." Preston Wells, Nathaniel's CFO of 12 years, stared at him across the expansive conference table. "You want to divert $30 million from our Singapore expansion to renovate an orphanage?" Nathaniel straightened the already perfect stack of documents before him. "The Sunflower Children's Home Foundation. Yes, but we've already committed to—" "I'm uncommitting," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice carrying the steel that had built his empire. "The Singapore expansion can wait 6 months." Around the table, 8 executive board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. For 5 years since Olivia's death, Blackwood Technologies had operated with ruthless efficiency. No delays, no deviations from strategic plans, and certainly no impulsive decisions based on sentiment. "This isn't like you." "Nathaniel," Victoria Chang, head of legal, said carefully, "is everything all right?" The question lingered in the air. Was everything all right? 2 months ago, Nathaniel would have said yes without hesitation. His life had been perfectly ordered: work, solitude, occasional philanthropy managed through appropriate channels. Now he found himself disappearing from his office to watch Marco's school science fair. Now his refrigerator held children's artwork alongside quarterly reports. Now his Sunday mornings, once devoted to market analyses, were spent making pancakes shaped like dinosaurs in an outdated kitchen while a dozen children critiqued his technique. "Everything is exactly as it should be," he replied finally. "Make it happen." Later that afternoon, Nathaniel drove to Sunflower, his mind still processing the morning's confrontation. The children were in school, giving him a rare opportunity to speak with Josephine without interruption. He found her in the office, a converted pantry barely large enough for her desk and filing cabinet. The wall above her computer displayed a collage of photos documenting every child who had passed through Sunflower in its 15-year history. "Nathaniel," she smiled, looking up from a stack of forms. "This is a pleasant surprise. I thought you had board meetings today." "I did." He handed her a folder. "The foundation paperwork is complete. Sunflower will receive the first installment next week." Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents. "$30 million? Nathaniel, this is too much." "It's not enough," he countered, sitting in the rickety chair across from her desk. "The building needs structural repairs, the children need college funds, And you need staff who aren't working for barely more than minimum wage out of the goodness of their hearts. Josephine set the papers down, studying him intently. Why are you really doing this, Nathaniel? The question pierced through his carefully constructed explanations about tax benefits and corporate social responsibility. Here, in this tiny office smelling of old books and coffee, his usual armor felt ineffective. Marco asked me yesterday what happened to my family, Nathaniel said quietly, surprising himself with the confession. He wanted to know if I was alone like him or just regular alone. What did you tell him? The truth. That my parents died when I was in college. That I was engaged once, but she died in an accident. That I've spent 5 years being what Marco calls alone. Nathaniel's voice remained steady, though something in his chest constricted painfully. He hugged me and said we could share his family, meaning you, the staff, the other children. Josephine's eyes glistened. That sounds like Marco. The thing is, Nathaniel continued, I'm beginning to think he might be right. The confession hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Before Josephine could respond, his phone rang. Preston, undoubtedly with more objections to the foundation plan. Nathaniel silenced it. I should warn you, Josephine said softly. Once these walls come down, there's no rebuilding them the same way. Maybe they needed to come down. The words felt foreign in his mouth, yet undeniably true. That evening, Nathaniel stayed for dinner. Then homework help, then bedtime stories. When the last child had been tucked in, he found himself in the kitchen helping Josephine prepare for the next day. You know, she said, measuring coffee grounds for the morning brew, before you started visiting, Marco rarely spoke about his birth parents or his arm. Now he talks about both. Yesterday, he told me that if you could build a company after losing your family, he could become an astronaut with one arm. Something warm and unfamiliar expanded in Nathaniel's chest. He'd make a remarkable astronaut. You're changing things here, Nathaniel. Not just with the money. Their eyes met across the kitchen counter, and the distance between billionaire and orphanage director seemed to dissolve. For a breathless moment, Nathaniel wondered what would happen if he stepped around the counter and closed that final gap between them. The moment shattered as little Penny appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit and complaining of monsters under her bed. Josephine immediately went to comfort her, and Nathaniel found himself following, kneeling beside Penny's bed to conduct a thorough monster inspection. All clear, he reported seriously. No monsters would dare enter a room protected by Sir Hoppington. He nodded toward the stuffed rabbit. Penny giggled, her fears forgotten. Can you stay until I fall asleep, Mr. Nate? He hesitated only briefly before sitting beside her bed. Of course. As Penny drifted off, Nathaniel realized he'd missed 3 calls from Preston and a video conference with potential investors. Strangely, for the first time in his adult life, business matters seemed less urgent than a child's peaceful sleep. In the fortress of his heart, another wall crumbled to dust. The family we choose. His fever's holding at 103, Dr. Veronica Bennett reported, removing the stethoscope from Marco's chest. The antibiotics should start working soon, but we need to keep him hydrated and monitored. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes never leaving Marco's small form beneath the hospital blankets. 3 days had passed since the boy had collapsed during dinner, his body burning with infection that had spread from what began as a simple cut on his residual limb. Can we take him home? Josephine asked, her usually steady voice trembling slightly. She hadn't left Marco's side except to shower in the hospital's family room. Not yet, Dr. Bennett replied gently. Another day or 2 of IV antibiotics, then we'll reassess. When the doctor left, silence fell over the private hospital room, the best in Rhode Island, arranged by Nathaniel with a single phone call. The room's large windows overlooked the hospital gardens, now illuminated by soft landscape lighting as evening descended. You should get some rest, Nathaniel told Josephine, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes. I'll stay with him, she shook her head. I can't leave him. Joe, he said softly, using the nickname he'd only recently allowed himself. You're exhausted. Marco needs you strong. Their eyes met across the hospital bed, and the intimacy of shared concern passed between them, a bond forged through sleepless nights and whispered prayers over a child they both loved, but neither had created. "Just an hour," she finally conceded. "Call me if anything changes." After she left, Nathaniel pulled his chair closer to Marco's bed, gently taking the boy's hand. In the 4 months since he'd stumbled upon Sunflower, Marco had burrowed into his heart with the determined efficiency of a child who refused to believe in emotional barriers. "You're going to be okay," Nathaniel whispered, though Marco remained unconscious. "You have adventures waiting, remember? Space missions, paper airplane championships, that science camp in June you've been talking about nonstop." Marco's fingers twitched slightly in his grasp, and Nathaniel found himself doing something he hadn't done since Olivia's accident. He prayed. His phone vibrated with an incoming call. Preston, again. The CFO had been calling relentlessly since Nathaniel had abruptly walked out of an investor meeting 3 days ago when Josephine called about Marco's collapse. When he didn't answer, a text appeared. "Emergency situation. County rejected Sunflower's operating license renewal. Building code violations. You need to see this now," cold dread washed through him as he opened the attached document, an official notice giving Sunflower 30 days to either bring the century-old building up to current institutional housing code or cease operations. "Mr. Nate?" Marco's voice, weak but wonderfully present, pulled Nathaniel from his spiraling thoughts. "Hey, astronaut." Nathaniel smiled, setting the phone aside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got sat on by an elephant," Marco croaked. "Is Miss Jo here?" "She's taking a quick rest. She hasn't left your side for 3 days. Marco's eyes widened. 3 days? Did I miss the field trip to the planetarium? Nathaniel chuckled despite himself. "We'll arrange another one when you're better." "Promise?" "I promise." And Nathaniel meant it with a certainty that surprised him. The same certainty that told him he wouldn't let Sunflower close, wouldn't let these children be scattered to different homes across the state, wouldn't let this accidental family he'd found be torn apart. When Josephine returned, the relief on her face at seeing Marco awake nearly brought Nathaniel to his knees. He stepped into the hallway, finally returning Preston's call. "Tell me exactly what we're dealing with," he demanded without preamble. The building inspector found significant issues: electrical, plumbing, fire safety. The estimate to bring everything up to code is nearly $2 million, and that's with an expedited timeline. "Make it happen," Nathaniel said immediately. "Pull from my personal accounts if necessary." "That's not all," Preston continued grimly. "The property was apparently rezoned last year. Even with repairs, they may not qualify for continued operation in that location." For a moment, Nathaniel felt the familiar cold efficiency of his pre-Sunflower self taking over, analyzing problems, calculating solutions, removing emotion from the equation. Then he glanced through the doorway at Marco, now smiling weakly as Josephine read from his favorite book, and something fiercer took its place. "Find me every zoning regulation, every precedent case, every possible angle," he instructed. "And get Victoria's legal team on this. I don't care what it takes. Sunflower stays open." That night, as Marco finally slept peacefully, his fever breaking at last, Nathaniel and Josephine sat in the small hospital room garden balcony, sharing coffee and concerns. "If we have to relocate, most of the older kids would need to switch schools," Josephine worried. "Trevor's finally making progress with his math teacher, and Esmeralda just made the debate team." "You won't have to relocate," Nathaniel assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. For all his wealth and influence, bureaucracy remained maddeningly impervious to both. "You can't just throw money at every problem," she said gently. "Watch me." She smiled despite her exhaustion. "That's the Nathaniel Blackwood the business magazines write about, the man who doesn't take no for an answer." "I used to think that man had everything figured out," Nathaniel admitted. "Now I realize he didn't know the first thing about what matters." Their hands found each other on the small table between them, fingers intertwining naturally. In the sterile hospital setting, surrounded by uncertainty and fear, something bloomed between them, fragile yet undeniable. "What if we lose everything?" Josephine whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. "What happens to the children?" Nathaniel squeezed her hand, certainty settling in his chest. "We won't lose anything. But if somehow we did, if the building disappeared tomorrow, Sunflower isn't about walls and roofs. It's about you, about Marco, about every child who's found family there. That's what I've learned." Tears spilled from Josephine's eyes. When did the infamous, emotionally unavailable Nathaniel Blackwood become so wise? "When an orphan with one arm and more courage than I'll ever have taught me how to build paper airplanes," he replied simply, and pulled her gently into his arms as the stars watched over them. A symphony of joy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the grand opening of the Sunflower Children's Center. Applause erupted from the gathered crowd as 13-year-old Esmeralda cut the ceremonial ribbon stretched across the entrance of the gleaming new building. Behind her, Marco, now fully recovered and sporting a custom prosthetic arm emblazoned with NASA logos, beamed with pride. 1 year had passed since the county's notice threatening Sunflower's closure. What had begun as a crisis had transformed into opportunity through equal measures of determination, legal maneuvering, and Nathaniel's newfound ability to build connections rather than walls. Instead of merely renovating the original Victorian home, Nathaniel had purchased the surrounding 5 acres and created something unprecedented, a campus dedicated not just to housing orphaned children, but to serving as a community hub for adoption services, family counseling, and educational support for disadvantaged youth throughout the region. The original Sunflower House remained at the heart of the campus, renovated but retaining its warm, homey character. Around it, modern buildings housed classrooms, therapy spaces, and recreational facilities. Most importantly, it remained home to the original 12 children and had already welcomed 8 more. "This is quite something," Governor Helena Reeves murmured to Nathaniel as they toured the facilities. "I've never seen a private-public partnership come together so quickly." "Motivation makes all the difference," Nathaniel replied, watching as Josephine led a group of potential adoptive parents through the Family Matching Center. Once the official ceremonies concluded and the politicians and press departed, the real celebration began. The Sunflower family, staff, children, and Nathaniel, gathered in the original house's dining room, now expanded but still bearing the marks of countless shared meals and conversations. "Speech," called Trevor, now 17 and already accepted to MIT's computer science program with a full scholarship from the Blackwood Foundation. Nathaniel shook his head, but the children's chants grew louder until Josephine nudged him forward. Public speaking had never fazed him. He'd addressed shareholders, congressional committees, and international technology summits without a flutter of nervousness. Yet standing before these children, who looked at him with genuine affection rather than deference or fear, he felt momentarily speechless. "1 year ago," he began finally, "I thought I had everything figured out. I had wealth, success, recognition, all the things society tells us matter. What I didn't have was this." He gestured to the room filled with expectant faces. "I didn't have family." Marco grinned from his place beside Josephine, giving Nathaniel a thumbs up with his prosthetic hand. "You all welcomed a stranger who showed up on your doorstep in a rainstorm," Nathaniel continued. "You taught me about paper airplanes and pillow forts, about courage and resilience, about choosing family when life doesn't provide one." His eyes found Josephine's, and the love reflected there still amazed him daily. "Someone very wise once told me that once certain walls come down, they can't be rebuilt the same way." She was right. I wouldn't want to rebuild them anyway. After dinner, as the younger children prepared for bed, Nathaniel found himself on the porch swing, the same one where he and Josephine had first begun to acknowledge the connection growing between them. Now she joined him, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder as twilight painted the campus in soft blues and purples. "I got a call from the Dawsons today," she said. "They're moving forward with adopting Penny." Nathaniel nodded, feeling the bittersweet mixture of happiness for the 4-year-old and sadness at the thought of her leaving Sunflower. They're good people. She'll be loved. That's always the goal, Josephine replied softly, even though saying goodbye never gets easier. It's not really goodbye, Nathaniel reminded her. The Dawsons are local. Penny will still be part of the extended Sunflower family. The concept of extended family had been Josephine's idea, creating a network of former residents, adoptive families, and supporters who remained connected through regular events and mentoring relationships. The children who left Sunflower never truly left the circle of care it had created. Marco appeared in the doorway, pajama-clad but clearly not ready for sleep. Mr. Nate, can I ask you something important? Of course, astronaut. What's on your mind? The boy fidgeted, uncharacteristically hesitant. Trevor says he'll come back and visit after he goes to college. But what about you? When all this new stuff is finished, will you go back to your glass house and just visit sometimes? The question hung in the air, innocent yet profound. Nathaniel glanced at Josephine, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Actually, Nathaniel said, I've been meaning to talk to everyone about that. I was thinking maybe it's time I moved a bit closer. Marco's eyes widened. You mean like in town? I was thinking more like here. Nathaniel reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. If Miss Jo says yes, that is. Josephine's hand flew to her mouth as Nathaniel slid from the swing to one knee before her. Marco's expression transformed from confusion to understanding to unbridled joy in the span of seconds. Josephine Winters, Nathaniel said, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. You showed me what matters when I had forgotten how to look. You rebuilt me when I didn't even realize I was broken. Will you? Yes! Marco shouted before Nathaniel could finish, causing both adults to burst into laughter. Marco, Josephine admonished gently, I believe he was asking me. Oh, right. The boy covered his mouth dramatically. Pretend I didn't say anything, Nathaniel continued, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant diamond ring. Josephine, will you marry me? Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded. Yes. As their lips met, Marco's excited whooping drew the attention of the other children, who spilled onto the porch in various states of pajama-clad curiosity. The news spread instantly, triggering a celebration of hugs, tears, and rapid-fire questions about when, where, and most importantly to the children, whether there would be cake. Hours later, long after the children had finally succumbed to sleep, Nathaniel and Josephine stood on the back lawn gazing up at the stars, her head nestled against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. 5 years of silence, he mused softly. I never thought I'd find joy again after losing Olivia. I thought I was protecting myself by shutting everything out. And now, Josephine asked, turning in his arms to face him. Now I know better, he replied simply. Now I know that healing doesn't come from silence or solitude. It comes from paper airplanes and bedtime stories, from children who see possibility where adults see limitations, from a woman brave enough to dedicate her life to creating family for those who've lost theirs. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the velvet sky. Make a wish, Josephine whispered. Nathaniel pulled her closer. The emptiness that had defined his existence now filled with a symphony of joy he never thought possible. No need, he said softly. I already have everything I could wish for. In the distance, the lights of his glass mansion on the cliff were barely visible, a monument to his past life that now seemed as remote as the stars above. The fortress he had built to keep pain away had also kept love at bay. Now, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of family, Nathaniel Blackwood had finally come home.